On this Memorial Day weekend, we remember Albert Bleich, who served in our military and who touched each of our hearts. And so we begin our service looking into the book of Psalms for comfort. There it is written, Esayinai el heharim, me'ayin yavo Ezri me'im Adonai oseh shamayim va'aretz. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from the Eternal, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. Behold, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all harm and protect your being. Adonai yishmor tzetecha uvoecha me'ata ve'ad olam. May the Eternal guard your soul in your going and your coming, now and forever. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, benotesha yarbitzeni. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. You make me lie down in green pastures. You lead me beside still waters. You restore my soul. You lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. With rod and staff you comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Eternal forever. O God, you have been our refuge in every generation. Before the mountains came into being, before you brought forth the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity, you are God. You return us to dust, you decree. Return, you mortals, for in your sight 1,000 years are as yesterday when it has passed, as a watch in the night. You engulf us in sleep. We are like grass that renews itself. At daybreak it flourishes anew. At dusk it withers and dries up. The span of our life is 80 years and 10, or given strength 80 years. But the best of those years have trouble and sorrow. They pass by speedily, and we are in darkness. Teach us, therefore, so to number our days, that we may attain a heart of wisdom. Turn to us, O God. Show mercy to your servants. Satisfy us at daybreak with your steadfast love, that we may sing for joy all our days. Let your deeds be seen by your servants, your glory by their children. May your favor, O God, be upon us. Establish the work of our hands, that it may long endure. Death has summoned our beloved Albert S. Bleich. Our souls cry out unto you, O God. What are we? Are we the creatures of dust whose destiny is but to return to the dust from which we came? The ancient sage has taught us, the spirit of the human being is the lamp of the Eternal. Not even the darkness of death can extinguish the light which the Eternal has kindled in the sanctuary of the human soul. Therefore, O God, we thank you in this solemn hour for that which was deathless in the life of our cherished Albert, and which is now revealed to us in all of its beauty. For his love that united us in life and which death cannot sever. For his companionship which we shared along life's path and which still continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of his heart and mind, which brought us joy and happiness, and now have become a precious heritage of the Spirit. For all these and more, we give you our praise. Grant unto us, O God, the strength of all the generations of our people, who in the face of bereavement proclaimed, Adonai Natan, v'Adonai Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach. God has given, God has taken away. Still, blessed be the name of God. In the biblical commentary is recorded a conversation between the beloved King David and God. David said, O God, many groups of tzaddikim shall be admitted into your presence. Which one of them is most beloved before you? And God answered, the teachers of the youth who perform their work in sincerity shall sit at my right hand. Teachers are held in the highest esteem in Jewish tradition, and our beloved Albert was no exception. Dedicated to learning, he was a kind of Renaissance man who enjoyed reading and learning and teaching. At the end of his days, he would declare with gratitude how lucky he was to have been able to do what he loved to do. His students were not only those to be found in the various classrooms, however. His children also were his students, learning from him about life and about his passions. His passions came from the depths of his soul and can be best understood by this story about the ancient Rabbi Elimelech. The tradition records that as the hour for his departure from this world neared, he placed his hands on the foreheads of his disciples, and he gave to each of them a portion of his soul. To the seer of Lublin, he gave the light of his eyes. To the Maggid of Koshnitz, he gave his heart. To Rabbi Mendel of Prustik, he gave his mind. And to the Rabbi of Apt, he gave the power of his tongue. What a beautiful story, reminding us that in his passing, Al left his students, his family, and all of us, a light in his eyes, a light worth their guarding, a heart worth remembering, a mind worth recalling, and a tongue whose wisdom death does not still. Our beloved Al was indeed a man who saw so much potential in the world and brought light into places of darkness. His heart reached out to so many of his students, accepting them fully for who they were. His mind was filled with knowledge and learning that he shared with sensitivity and with kindness. And his tongue could be golden, offering wise words of counsel and sage words of information. Because a teacher shares his soul in these ways, his family and all of us, his students, by extension, are greatly enriched, and his treasures live on in the eyes and heart and mind and words dedicated to his memory. For what we learn from a teacher is not only the subject matter that they are trying to teach at hand, but a student actually studies the teacher too. And this leaves a legacy of how to conduct one's life long after the formal lessons have been forgotten. This was true of Al's children, of Andy and Timmy and Cindy and David and Jeremy, and of his sons and daughter-in-law, of Jeff and Kevin and Lynn, and of his grandchildren, Shauna and Jacob, Isaac and Ben, Max, Kayla and Aiden, and Billy and Kim. Each of you has precious memories of all the knowledge that Albert shared with you, but even more so, You have the lessons learned by studying the soul of this special man. Al would share with them the knowledge of his early years, which shaped the man who he would become. Born in East Cleveland, Al was the son of Zelma and Adolf Bleich, and the younger brother of Gloria by about 6 years. Al's father traveled a great deal, working in sales in the northwestern states, and so he would go and visit and help him during the summers. But most of the time, Albert was raised by his mom and his sister, both of whom he loved dearly. Albert's sister would marry Alvin Klein, and as they created their families to include Albert's nephew, Gary, and niece Donna, the lot of them would enjoy many holidays together and sharing in each other's lives. Albert would attend Cleveland Heights High School and spend the first 2 years of college at the Ohio State University, but he finished at Western Reserve. This was because his father had become ill and the family needed him to be closer to home. And Al needed a job quickly to help out. He went searching for one at the May Company. Al's grandson, Jacob, remembered Al telling him that he was originally turned down for a job on that day, but when Al just about begged for it, he was hired to work in the shoe department. At 20 years old, it was beschert. It was meant to be that Al should get the job in the shoe department, and that his lifelong friend, Carl Nash, would introduce him to the woman who would become his beschert, the 16-year-old Helen Engel. It could have been divine intervention or the way he played his ukulele in the storage room that drew Helen to him. With his wry sense of humor, he would tell her that he'd written every song that would come up on the radio just for her. No one's really sure if she actually believed him, but they did indeed become a handsome couple, and shortly after his graduation, they were married on February 8, 1953. Albert would always consider himself lucky that he got her. Almost immediately afterward, Albert was called up to serve in the Korean War, but was fortunate that he would spend their honeymoon and the next few years in Little Rock. In his work there, Al served as a supply manager and clerk, developing excellent typing skills, and these would pay off later on. He and Helen enjoyed playing there, made wonderful friends, and would have these friends last a whole lifetime. After returning to Cleveland, Albert and Helen would pick up their lives with Carl and now Jean Nash, their very special friends with whom they would share so much. Al would start his work in insurance for a while, and then in advertising briefly. And even as Helen and he were joyfully welcoming their children, arriving just about every 2 years, and then finally Jeremy 6 years after, Helen would see that Albert was unhappy in his work. Knowing the kind of sacrifice it would take to have a big family on a teacher's salary, she nonetheless encouraged Al to put his GI Bill into service and inspired him to continue his studies. At her urging, he went back to school to follow his passion, to become a teacher, and she tried her best to keep the kids quiet so as not to interfere with his studies. You know the kids. Albert was a true lover of learning, and he was able to share that with his students, first at Shore Junior High School and then later at Euclid High School, where he taught business, math, accounting, and typing for 23 years. He would go on to receive his master's degree from John Carroll University, and he would say that receiving this degree in front of his children was one of the proudest moments of his life. Albert would continue taking classes, enough to qualify for a doctorate, but did not complete the dissertation. In addition to his daytime teaching, he would become an adjunct professor of economics at Lakeland Community College. Praised in each of these settings for his devotion to his students and his excellence in his teaching, Albert had a wonderful reputation. and he would be called on to take on additional responsibilities that would help with raising a family. One such was as playground director, where he met Terry Lee Fritsch, another very dear friend. Although Albert would eventually retire from his formal position as a teacher, he never retired from the endeavor of learning new things and of collecting multitudes of books. Al took his love of learning with him wherever he went. He was a huge Civil War aficionado, and so summer vacations with the family often meant following some trail or exploring some battle site. Closer to home, Al and Helen would enjoy their time as ushers for the theater, and playing bridge with friends kept their minds sharp. And through his hobbies and activities, he was inspiring his children's interests as well. They would learn from his insight and from the way he viewed the world and what his mind and heart cared about. It seemed that each of you could identify a major interest of your own and trace it back directly to your father. For Andy, for example, she picked up her love of animals and advocacy for the environment from Al. He always had a dog, and when Andy rescued Bono and gave it to Al, the two of them were inseparable. You said putting him down was the only time you remember seeing your dad cry. But he kept getting a new dog and would more subtly sneak food to the dog, even your other dogs at home, from the table. Al also had a passion for wolves, and he loved the matching pictures that Andy shared with him, or later, the sweatshirt that Jeremy found. For Timmy, it was his love of sports that you inherited. When you take your dad to an Indians game against the Yankees, of course he'd root for Cleveland. But he also had a soft spot for Lou Gehrig. Another sports outing that you shared was taking your parents to Cooperstown. What a joy for him, a man who remembers so many facts and details about baseball. For Cindy, you shared a love of history. You'd read some large tomes on the presidents, and then you'd have your private book club with your dad. He especially admired Jefferson and the other scholar-like presidents. Sharing his mind with you was really special, and he gave you a love of learning at any age and encouraged you to go back to school to pursue your interests. David, your dad taught you to love water. He himself swam at least a mile every day. His goggles and his faded swim trunks were his hallmark. And you taught him also how to enjoy kayaking, and he kept his kayak in the garage. More importantly, you taught him how to be a good nurse, how to care for those he loved. And for Jeremy, you and your father had those Socratic discussions of philosophy, where he argued for Western thought and you took to Eastern teachings. Yet what you were learning was not only the text, but his worldview, which was to be accepting of differences. For all of you, the relationship with the man who had been called upon to be that traditional disciplinarian as the five of you were growing up, matured into a beautiful friendship. And along with your partners who became like his extended children, there developed a strong sense of caring and love between you. He treated Jeff like another son and got to see him regularly, and Jeff introduced Al to the computer. Al didn't quite get Facebook, and he would refer to those on it as, "I'm friendly with so-and-so." But then again, he could have truly been friendly with so many of us. He had a wonderful sense of humor and a great laugh, and we were all happy to be the beneficiaries of that. Al appreciated Kevin and the fabulous fireworks for the 4th of July that you'd send up, and all the times that you'd share dinners together. And though Lynn was further away in Florida, he loved visiting and staying in touch. And once you were family, he never let you go, and you stayed committed to him, as Mindy discovered. With all of his children, he was immensely grateful for your kindness and your compassion and for the way you'd always include him. Andy, you'd take him out for fancy dinners on Friday nights. Cindy, he loved your home cooking on Sunday nights. But he had simple tastes. While you could bring him bags of groceries, all he really cared about were the nips and the chocolate ice cream. And heaven forbid you forgot those. You'd be back at the store before you could unload the groceries. Slowly but surely, he came to depend on you more and more, especially when it came to your offering him good counsel. And that was even more magnified when it came to the grandchildren. Whatever shortcomings he may have had as a father, he more than made up for them as a grandfather. Devoted to each of you, especially the girls, he always liked girls and liked flirting with them at the supermarket or at the dinner counter. He was your papa, and he had a huge influence on each of your lives. With calls back and forth, you'd stay in touch, sharing your joys. He was always lifting you and encouraging you to take the tougher path, to finish your education. And you could talk to him about anything. He had a great way of being accepting of whatever you were doing and of being respectful of life choices. Perhaps because he'd seen more than most in his classrooms, he was always open to hear your view and ready to share his opinion on elections, politics, or any matter on CNN. He'd share books with you too, and if you read something interesting, you'd call it to his attention as well. You were his technology tutors. That was a kind of payback for all the times that you'd call him as homework hotline, where he would share some words of wisdom for school or life with you. Didn't matter your age or how much blood you shared, he was a wonderful grandfather to all of you. I remember Al at so many of the family celebrations, especially with the grandchildren. Jacob and Shauna, Max and Kayla, having their special ceremonies at our temple meant that we got to see Albert and Helen often. And graduation parties and holiday celebrations were their delight to see family and friends. And clearly, he loved how we all showered him with attention, especially the girls. Albert was a friend to many of your friends at all ages, and the kind and gentle soul that we all looked forward to seeing. He was fun to hang out with and entertaining to listen to his stories, and we always knew when he was finished listening as he'd start to hum his favorite tunes, tuning us out. But he never tuned out his beloved Helen. He'd remind family and any of us often, "Isn't she beautiful?" or announce her entrance with, "And here's Grammy," or "My wife Helen." Albert missed her so much. And after 58 and a half years together, he was really quite a shell of himself after her passing in March of 2011. Devoted to her, he had taken such good care of her, and afterward his own health seemed to become a series of hospital stays and nursing home visits. I'd see him sometimes there and have some amazing talks with him. And he'd return home. He'd return home because his dog Molly was home. Molly, whom everyone thought was way too much for him, but she would come to his rescue when he recently fell, and she scrambled upstairs to get Jeremy to help. The last few days gave family the chance to talk quite honestly with your father and your grandfather. What you learned from the master teacher was perhaps his most precious lesson. Opening his heart and soul to you, he told you about how grateful he was to each of you, and that he had lived a wonderful life, married to the love of his life, with all his kids doing well and his grandchildren the joy of his life. He'd had the chance to spend his life in learning and teaching and to see his vision for his family moving to fruition. A teacher of the youth and of the aging, Albert, the grand patriarch of this family, has left his mark on many of our minds and hearts. We pray that the beautiful story of his life will remain our legacy too, teaching us to see the world through his eyes, living with passion in our hearts, challenging our minds at every age, and speaking with words of encouragement. Al left his students, his family, and his friends with a light in his eyes, a light worth our guarding, with a heart worth remembering, a mind worth recalling, and a tongue whose wisdom death does not still. And therefore we join with the sages to declare, Zichrono livracha, may his memory be our blessing. Amen. I'd like to call on his grandson Max to come and share a few words of memory too.
Albert, Dad, Papa, Grandpa, Big Al, Ukulele Al, Big A, or just simply Al. These were just a few of the popular and loving names that family and friends had for my grandfather, Albert S. Bleich. But who was Albert? To his children, he was a firm figure of authority. To his grandchildren, he was a step above the venerable, wise embodiment of love and philosophy we have come to expect from grandparents. To his wife, he was a caregiver and devoted husband. To many more, he was a teacher who was not to be forgotten. He was an American everyman who loved sports, his wooden tobacco pipes, his family, his books, a good, hearty education, his many dogs, and most of all, his prized possession, my Grammy, Helen. Albert may have loved life, but life without his beloved and cherished wife was not easy for him. Yet he still found joy in texts, family and friends, and his companion, Molly. Albert was a caregiver. He worked hard to provide for his 5 children, where he worked tirelessly to achieve what he called the greatest moment in his life, receiving his master's in education, a ceremony he remembered his family all together to witness. After that, in an effort to rise on the pay scale and also to gain the knowledge he craved, Albert achieved the course equivalent of a PhD, bringing his knowledge and skills to Euclid High School and Lakeland Community College, where he taught business math. He loved to teach, but he also loved to learn. And his hundreds, literally hundreds, of books, maybe thousands, on philosophy, history, Jewish thought, and politics permeated his entire house and helped fuel an intense fire of knowledge, the likes of which we now know still burns in the hearts and minds of his children and grandchildren. But again, Albert was a caregiver. When my grandmother Helen fell very ill, he was there by her side. I could still hear his voice announcing her arrival to a family barbecue. "Here's Grammy." Albert never stopped loving her, caring for her, or remembering her. She was his life. And when she had to go, he was lost and broken. So, being the caregiver that Albert was, he took on the responsibility of caring for an energetic, rotund, and seemingly frightening dog, Molly. But in reality, this dog was nothing but love and affection, the likes of which she tirelessly displayed for Albert. Molly was Albert's protector in his final years, and during his final days, she refused to leave his side. Albert loved animals, and he especially loved Molly. He overfed her a lot with food and affection, and he cared for her as though the line between human and canine had been blurred. When he entered hospice, he was asked to set a goal. Do you know what that goal was? To make sure he was there to care for his beloved dog, Molly. Albert truly was a caregiver. But he also was a great father and a greater grandparent. Albert was always curious about the lives of his grandchildren, always proud of all of their accomplishments, and he never let any of them forget how much he loved them. Every time we spoke, the conversation, now canonized as official Albert dialogue, began like this. "How you doing, Papa?" "Pretty good, for an old guy." "How's school?" "Great, I've been thinking of going back to school myself. I hear there's a great program on sociology of aging at John Carroll." And we would both go on to talk about everything under the sun, from politics to Judaism to philosophy, and the thing he always wanted to know, how I was doing, what I was up to, where I was going, and how I would get there. He was always excited when someone came to visit him. He was always excited about what you were doing. He was always proud, and he always let you know that Grammy was proud too. And I know I speak for many when I say that the world is a lot less supportive, a lot less humorous, and a lot less interesting without Albert here. But we can all take solace in knowing that he's still proud of all of us, and he's finally together again with Helen, his guiding light. Goodbye, Papa. You showed me that to teach is to touch a life forever, and you certainly touched mine.
Each of us has precious memories of Albert. We take a moment now as we silently compose the eulogy of our own hearts. Yehiu l'ratzonim refi, v'hegyon libi lefanecha, Adonai tzuri v'goali. May not only the words that we speak, but even our most precious meditations and private memories be acceptable to you, our God, our Rock, and our Redeemer. Amen. We ask God to accept Albert's soul with the words of El Malay. Please rise. El Malay Rachamim, Shochein Ba'amaromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, Im Kedoshim Utehorim, Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Avraham Ben Zalman Ve'edal, Shalchal Olamo, Baal Harachamim, Yastireha Veseter Kenafav Olamim, Bitzror HaChaim Et Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, V'yanuach B'shalom Al Mishkavo, V'nomar Amen. O compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Albert S. Bleich, who has entered unto eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. Be thou his inheritance, and may he rest in peace. And let us answer, Amen. You may be seated. Our service continues at the Mount Olive Cemetery, and the family invites you back to the home of Cindy and Jeff Tepper, which is at 2574 Biscayne Boulevard in Beechwood.